Welcome everybody to the next session of the SECREV Cybersecurity Conference. We've been having a lot of interesting sessions so far. It's been very enjoyable for me, at least, to watch the rest of the sessions as they've been on throughout the night and into the morning, and then into the wee hours of the morning, and then into the early afternoon. It's been very exciting. We're very happy to be a part of the process this year. This session, we will be running a multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral, cross-industry PPP style panel with points. So it will be a game show style. We'll be running 3 rounds. Each of the rounds will be scored independently. One group will be posing a question to the other groups. The questions have all been submitted by members in the group, but the people who will be asking the questions will be me, so you won't get to know who actually posed the question in the first place. To make sure that we do things fairly, I will be awarding points, and nobody will be able to question the points that I allot to people. That's the fairest way I've thought of to do this. So, without further ado, I'd very much like to give the panelists the opportunity to each introduce themselves. So I will be running around the table, saying their first name, and then giving them a few minutes just to introduce themselves, what they do, and why they are here on this expert panel that is gamifying Canadian cybersecurity education and awareness information, and really discussing those things in order to award a championship to somebody. So, running around the table from the solutions team first, we'll start off with Scott.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, wherever you are. I'm Scott Wright, CEO of ClickArmor, a cybersecurity coach and risk management consultant for about 20 years or so. Currently running a company called ClickArmor, and it's a unique gamified cybersecurity training platform that fills the gap between training consumption by employees and live phishing simulations. You can probably imagine we make a lot of assumptions about what people understand, what they learn, what knowledge they retain, and how ready they are to actually be tested with things like live phishing simulations. So we built ClickArmor specifically on a security awareness, role-based training and security remediation platform built on a game engine. So I do a lot of other things as well. In the past, I've done innovative projects like the Honey Stick project, where I've lost over 100 smartphones in my career to measure opportunistic threats to mobile devices. I do a lot of outreach on LinkedIn as well via my Human Cybersecurity Insights newsletter. And of course, we run a bi-weekly cybersecurity awareness forum on Zoom, which everybody can find on LinkedIn if they reach me. And we do a series of live panel sessions where we hold topics on anything related to human risk management, security awareness, with 30 or 40 security professionals every couple of weeks. And it's a lot of fun. So in a nutshell, I'm passionate about security awareness, human risk management, and gamification. Really looking forward to this fun event.
And your side hustle as a podcaster really comes through as well. Next, David.
Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Dave Shipley. I'm the CEO and PAC lead at Beauceron Security. Our whole goal is to help turn people from the passive targets of cybercrime, the sheep, into the active defenders, or the sheepdogs, hence why our company and technology is named after a sheepdog from northern France. We've done a lot of work in gamification, particularly to help translate knowledge into actual motivation. And so we pioneered the concept of a personal cyber risk score that people can see and influence through attitudes, knowledge, and behavior, gamifying phishing in a new way, so that instead of just having experiences where you lose, you clicked on the thing, bad you can actually win by spotting and reporting the phish, or falling victim and then reporting and learning from the phish. I'm really passionate about advancing the state of actual research in this space, not just vendor communications and perceptions of things through the lens of a commercial sale, but actually generating good science, good data that academics and others can actually build on and work and advance the state. I think cybersecurity awareness is still in the end of the very first chapter of a very long book, and we have much work to do together. So excited to be here today and to share what insights I can, and more excited to learn from everyone else.
And we'll pass it across to you.
Sorry, Michael, you cut out there. Did you say Claudio?
I did.
Awesome. Well, I'm Claudio Popa. Thank you very much for having me. I am the CEO of Informatica Corporation. It's Canada's largest collection of cybersecurity brands. It encompasses information security, managed privacy, and even industrial cybersecurity. But my passion is the nonprofit foundation that was created some 15 years ago now. I'm the co-founder of Knowledge Flow, Canada's cyber safety foundation. We do three things. One is security research. We have a team of young people who spend their days researching and updating a variety of publications on the cybersafetyfoundation.org page. The second is a massive list of courses, free education, students, teachers, law enforcement. Anyone can go and get a badge and run through courses and learn to keep themselves and their families safe. And finally, we help nonprofits. The nonprofit sector is one of the least or the most underserviced, the least secure in Canada, because they are being targeted, because they tend to invest far less than regular businesses. So we help nonprofits with solutions that are as affordable as to be zero cost. Speaking of side hustles, Michael, my side hustles are two blogs, the Bad Security blog and the Bad Privacy blog, where I get to share some unfiltered thoughts. So it's great to be here with all of these special people. As I said in my LinkedIn post, consummate professionals, and I'm looking forward to the experience. And thank you for the invite.
Great. And with that, we'll move on to our academic group, or people doing more research, primarily doing research. And we'll start with Cara.
I'm Boyven. I'm the Director of Research at Media Smarts. Media Smarts is Canada's nonprofit charitable center for digital media literacy. So our vision and mission is that everyone in Canada has the ability to use all forms of technology confidently and critically. So cybersecurity and cybersecurity awareness is a small part of what we do, and would be couched in kind of our model of digital media literacy under the sort of use and access-based skills. But another sort of core component of our approach to digital media literacy is the engage and critical thinking sort of components, understanding components of technology. So we like to sort of include those components into the ways in which we talk about and teach and educate around cybersecurity. So you'll probably see that reflected in our conversation here today. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Khadija, who's also from Media Smarts, if that's okay, Michael.
Go ahead.
Oh, technical difficulties, no. Hi, everyone. I'm Khadija. I am a Research and Evaluation Associate with Media Smarts, so I'm part of the research team. And as Kara mentioned, we do a lot of research sort of focusing on a wide component or wide variety of digital literacy aspects, things like online hate, mis and disinformation, even looking at youth's perceptions of the internet and internet usage. So quite multifactorial, interdisciplinary, I would say. And I think that covers it on our end. Michael, back to you.
Perfect. Next up is Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Stobart. I'm an assistant professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, where my research is about usable security, essentially looking at human factors in security systems and how we can design computer security mechanisms to acknowledge those human users. I'm a member of the Department of Computer Science, but my own background is heavily interdisciplinary. I have a master's degree in psychology, and a lot of my work is focused around trying to take what we know about how the human brain works, about how we understand and process information, what we're aware of, and turn that back into solutions for security. Over the years, I've done work on a variety of elements of computer security, including phishing, passwords, security education, and I'm interested in a number of elements of computer security as it relates to awareness. Currently, I've got a couple of students doing work on culture and security and how that plays into people's awareness and education and approaches, as well as some active projects on computer security education. So I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Next up is Sana.
Hi, I'm Sana Maksud. I'm an assistant professor at York University in Toronto. And my research is within usable security and privacy. So looking at the human-centric perspective of security and privacy. My work specifically focuses on youth and people from low SES communities. And so part of that work involves designing security education or awareness tools for these users. And really happy to be here.
Wonderful. And with that, we're going to move on to our group of practitioners where the rubber meets the road, or the promises and theory meets reality. And we'll start off with Sandy.
Thank you, Michael. Sandy Gillis, I'm with Bell Canada. I'm responsible for the security awareness or human risk management program at Bell. Been in the security field for about 10 years now and joined this role looking after the human risk side of it about 2 years ago. I have to say it's been quite an interesting journey to jump into this, and really have gotten very passionate about it. I look at the field of security and say that we've done an awful lot in the world of technology and process, but the human side of things is where I believe there's the greatest opportunity to enable people to be far more effective at what they do and be the good protectors, if you will. Bell's been involved with this for a number of years, and we've evolved our program quite a lot in the last couple of years and seen tremendous growth in it. A few people on this call may be familiar with the conference that we do internally, where we get over 3,000 people every year to really give them a lot of the fundamentals around cybersecurity and give them things that they can use not just at work, but at home as well. We've also expanded the program over the last year to go beyond just how do we enable employees and make them more effective and good cyber defenders, but we also feel that we have a bit of a responsibility to help our customers too. So we've started to expand and do some work to help customers understand some fundamentals on things that they can do to protect themselves, protect their accounts, protect their data, the privacy, etc. So very happy to be here today. I'm really looking forward to it because like I said, I found the human side of security has been one of the most interesting things I've done.
Great. Marie-Claude?
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Marie Belanger. I'm the supervisor of the Cyber Skills Development Team at the Cyber Center, and I'm here today with my colleagues Anthony Hope and Laura Fifield, both senior engagement analysts at the Cyber Center. And if you aren't familiar with CSC and Cyber Center, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity is part of the Communications Security Establishment, which is a federal government agency, and we're both headquartered in Ottawa. In our recruitment material, we often refer ourselves as being the most important organization you've never heard of. So born of World War II code-breaking efforts, CSC will be celebrating its 78th anniversary this June. CSC is Canada's agency responsible for foreign and signal intelligence, cyber operation, and cybersecurity, where we gather foreign signals intelligence to defend Canada's national security and keep the government of Canada's information secure. The Cyber Center opened in 2018, in October of 2018, as the key initiative under Canada's National Cybersecurity Strategy and is the single unified source of expert advice, guidance, services, and support on cybersecurity for Canadians. And one of our roles is to work with critical infrastructure, industry, and academia to protect Canadians from cyber threat. And our team specifically, the Cyber Skills Development Team, specifically works with the academic community and private sector educators to build cybersecurity talent capacity in Canada by supporting the development of cyber skills in the academic sector and promoting the integration of cybersecurity curriculum in Canada's education system. So we're very much looking forward to this panel discussion, and I'll pass it along to Anthony quickly.
All right, thanks, Marie, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever the audience is viewing, where you're located today. My name is Anthony Hope. I'm a senior cyber engagement advisor with the Cyber Skills Development Team. in the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. And with my colleague Laura, we both focus on the university, college, Canadian Cégep and Polytechnique communities, reaching out to them, trying to understand the various needs that those communities have, whether it's building interest or helping students explore cybersecurity, or possibly helping with curriculum development, or just being a partner in the space. My own background, I'm relatively new to cybersecurity. I joined the Cyber Center in January of this year, but I do have a background in public safety, with more on the CSE side of things. And I think this has given me a really good insight into the learning process with cybersecurity, and understanding that as I'm providing advice and guidance and working with partners, I'm also learning a lot about the space myself. And I've been really excited to jump into a lot of different projects, focusing on generative artificial intelligence, and tools and technologies that are at the leading edge, which has been really exciting. My background, I have a Master's of Arts degree in Intelligence and International Affairs, and I focused there as part of my capstone research project on building human-centered insider risk programs that are responsive to, at that time, was the COVID-19 pandemic, and this work from home environment that worked for organizations and worked for employees as well. So really excited to be here, really excited to learn from the panelists here today. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Wonderful. And Laura?
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Fifield. As Marie mentioned, I'm a senior cyber engagement advisor on her team at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. I think Anthony kind of covered everything that we're working on, which is great. I just wanted to say I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
That's great. And Julie from Get Cybersafe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia from Get Cybersafe. And for those who don't know about the campaign, we are the Government of Canada's national public awareness campaign for cybersecurity. And we help inform Canadians about the importance of cybersecurity and teach them about the simple steps they can take to help themselves stay safe online. And like what was mentioned by my colleagues from the Cyber Center, the campaign is led by the Communication Security Establishment, and all of our advice and guidance is supported and derived from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity's advice and guidance. Get Cybersafe is a digital-first campaign, and we have many resources on how to secure Canadians' devices, accounts, connections, and more on our website, getcybersafe.ca. And our resources range from blogs, infographics, videos, games, and other interactive content for individuals, ranging from kids and youth to older adults, as well as guides and resources for Canadian small business. We're here today because we believe that cybersecurity awareness is the main component of our mandate, of course, at Get Cybersafe. It's our raison d'etre, and we're so happy to be here and take part in today's discussions as best as we can, given our mandate. And we're even more excited to listen and learn from the rest of the participants on the panel. Thank you so much for having us.
Wonderful. It's great to have everyone here, and I'm very excited to have such an interesting panel. Myself, my name's Michael Joyce. I'm the Executive Director of the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership, which is a Canada-wide and international group of researchers and public and private partners who are all looking at the problem of cybersecurity from the social sciences and humanities perspectives first. Also including computer science, of course, because you can't get away from it, but we're giving the reins to the social scientists and the humanities groups to see what happens, which is very exciting. Myself, I'm also working on a PhD in my spare time, looking at the question of why people click on things that they later regret clicking on and whether we can do something about it. And I also have a podcast called Cybercrimeology, if you're interested in research into cybercrime. That's enough about me, though, because I won't be answering any of the questions today. So you're probably more interested in the backgrounds of the people who actually will. And so with that, let's move on to round one. And round one will be answered by our teams from solutions and academia. And question one in round one is, what kind of impact will generative AI have on cybersecurity? What kind of impact will generative AI have on cybersecurity? With that, I'm going to first pass it over to David from the solutions team.
So generative AI can have both positive and negative aspects. On the negative aspects, it's well documented through intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and others, the presence of criminal versions of generative AI technologies, large language models. So whether that's upskilling and improving the quality and caliber of phishing in various ways, we can anticipate that. So, how do we need to adjust our advice based on potentially the reduction of grammatical formatting or other areas as things become more sophisticated, the scalability and ease of use, the potential ability to gather and use open source information to create more compelling and customizable lures. It just adds fuel to an already highly effective, from a return on investment perspective, criminal technique. Now, on the other side, large language models may open up new opportunities to improve our ability to analyze and provide feedback to end users about manipulative techniques, language, indicators. Can we create better user interfaces that give people more context and help? Can we turn the report a phish button from the is it good from the company in a tech button to the staples that was easy? I'm not sure if this is phishing. Help tell me more about this. So I think it cuts both ways. At the end of the day, human cleverness continues to be the dominant factor in effective social engineering. So I think there are limitations to generative AI in that it doesn't understand language and context. But do I think it's a useful aid? Yes. Is it the nuclear weapon of social engineering? No. The human brain continues to be the most dangerous aspect of social engineering.
Interesting. Let's pass it across to the academia group with Khadija.
Hi, thanks for your response. Talking briefly about social engineering and generative AI, agreed that it is the human brain, but sort of drawing back to the idea, I've seen arguments for both, generative AI being used to enhance cybersecurity, to help detect phishing or social engineering attacks. But I've also seen it kind of paradoxically, as mentioned, being used as the end-all be-all for social engineering. Better grammar. For example, deepfakes being cited quite a bit as the next sort of step in social engineering. Putting the more computer sciencey aspects of that aside, though, I also want to talk a little bit about the need for algorithmic literacy. So often when we refer to AI or generative AI, as experts on this panel, we do understand a definition or tend to operate under the circumstances or assumptions that, people in general know what that is. So I think that while we as experts might have a more deeper and nuanced understanding of how Gen AI might actually, affect cybersecurity, positive or negative in the future, there is a question or a point to be thought on of how to actually mobilize that knowledge and translate that across the broader community. I'm going to pass it to Kara in my organization, who might have a little bit more to say on this.
Really great response, Khadija. I think just one of the things that we bring to the table and that our research highlights, as Khadijah's already started to mention, is that we can't operate necessarily from sort of assumption that people understand what we mean when we say in the first place. And so for people to be able to have critical considerations about what the cybersecurity risks are when it comes to generative AI, they need to first understand what the technology is and how it works. The other thing that I would just emphasize to the question, Michael, is that we need to think about the intersectional implications of the uses of AI. So, AI, there's lots of research from the field of critical research on how, algorithmic designs or, other forms of artificial intelligence, LLMs, et cetera, intersect with all of the other kinds of marginalizations that communities are already experiencing in their everyday lives. And I think that often that can be overlooked as well. So when we are thinking about some of the risks, I think we need to really broaden that our sort of definition and understanding of risks when it comes to AI in particular.
Interesting. We'll pass it back to Claudia.
I like the way Kara put it about broadening the risk discussion, and I'm always thinking from the perspective of harms and what the harms might be in the application of generative AI. With respect to the impact, there's no doubt that this has a transformative and irreversible impact on the way we do work. We obviously have the potential to augment and multiply our productivity using generative AI in the workplace. We can analyze vastly more data, security data. I'm talking about security events because I'm a security guy. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you're looking at vast amounts, mountains of events that need to be analyzed for potential malicious activity. Obviously, it could be used to create realistic breach simulations, phishing emails, and so on. We're also experimenting with that at the foundation. We certainly imagine automating a lot of security tasks, which right now come with the risk of missing various events and potentially making mistakes of a serious nature in security configuration. However, those harms that we talked about earlier have to do with not just security risks, but also potential harms that are associated with the supply chain. And that supply chain has to do with the data brokers that deliver a full AI solution. We're seeing that in every single case today. There's no cloud system that operates in a vacuum. Obviously, there is the potential for data leaks, for LLM compromises, and of course, automated attacks. So it's a balance of both.
Wonderful. And I like the idea of a cloud not operating in a vacuum. Cloud in a vacuum would be a glass of water, would it not?
The cloud is someone else's computer, I'm told.
And we'll pass it across to Elizabeth.
So I think I'm about to echo what lots of people have said here. I don't think the effect of generative AI is going to be evenly felt across all the elements of cybersecurity as they affect end users, or even as they affect like IT providers or developers or anyone else involved in this life cycle. My mind also went to social engineering. Like, I do see possibilities for harms, the sophistication of social engineering and phishing attacks. But I also really like Claudia's point about how we might be able to use these AI tools to process more data, to create like automated processes that help people understand kind of a bigger picture of their security. One of my long-term ideas has been that people don't have very good situation awareness of their kind of overall security. People aren't good at answering questions about their own personal risk profile. Most of my work is about end users, so I'll mainly talk about that. And I think that tools like password managers have some promise to be a kind of centralized point for helping people answer those questions, because people really don't know. They can't even answer questions like, how many accounts do I have? And so I think that's really an exciting opportunity for generative AI to help people get a kind of more holistic understanding of their personal security, what the vulnerabilities might be, to kind of bring together information that they're not thinking maybe to link together. And so it seems like there's some exciting opportunities there for individuals' awareness and control and engagement with their kind of personal risk profile. Obviously, it sounds pretty complicated to construct, but I do think that coming from a positive standpoint, like the opportunity to generate training scenarios and tools like that could also be really helped by generative AI. But overall, like we always talk about the bleeding edge of security, about the attacker being one step ahead, and it's hard not to think that this is a tool that's going to work really well there as well. So I don't know what to predict in that space.
Wonderful. And just before we pass it to Scott, I'm going to ask the practice team if you have a follow-up question or a burning point that you'd like to add to this debate, or rephrase or clarify with the answers, the groups that have answered so far. I'll just get you to pop your hand up so that I can see you and cross back to you. But with that, we're going to pass the conversation over to Scott.
Thanks. Yeah, some really interesting perspectives. From my point of view, working so much in the security awareness space with businesses and doing a lot of discussions with different professionals, from a security awareness point of view, I think the most important impact of generative AI will unfortunately be a loss of public trust in most online media and interactions. We're seeing escalation of deep fake capabilities. In one of our cybersecurity forum sessions, we had a gentleman named George Kamid. We were talking about the Hong Kong video deep fake that was, a $20 million breach on an international company. But that technology and capability was demonstrated less than 2 years ago at Black Hat and DEF CON, and now it's actually being exploited. So these things are really escalating, and I just listened to an episode of the Darknet Diaries with Jack Rhysider on pig butchering and a bunch of different actually, no, it was the one with Rachel Toback on social engineering. And he did an example of his own voice sampling, and I could not tell the difference. It was so good. We're just going to see a lot more attacks, I think, in the social engineering side. So unfortunately, I'm not that optimistic that AI will simplify our lives. There's so many layers of security technologies and just generally IT technologies that I think it's going to be frustrating from a reliability point of view. There are going to be gaps on things that don't really work well. On the bright side, I think the best hope we have is probably something like public key infrastructure, where everybody has cryptographic authentication, and even our media players will have to have cryptographic authentication and maybe even a chain of trust to show who created it, who had access to it, who modified it, and ultimately, is it reliable or not? And so we actually, I don't think, understand the ultimate social impacts of generative AI. So I think attackers are ultimately going to benefit more, at least for as long as I can see, a foreseeable future. And that just means we're going to need a lot more research on this. So love to work with more people on that.
Very interesting. So we've heard some insights and responses from both of the team. But I'm going to ask Anthony if he has a follow-up question for anyone or all of the people who've answered so far.
Great, thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for those answers. Really, really interesting. My question, I'll pose it to anyone who wants to answer it. And I'm thinking of this question less in the technical aspect of the cybersecurity and more on public adoption and the public's willingness to engage in AI tools. And I think, Scott, you rightly pointed out that there's a lot of trust, and reputation is really important, particularly with cybersecurity. Generally people just want to know that they'll be safe. They don't care how that's going to happen. And if there's an error or if there's a vulnerability, then reputation and trust is really lost. Now, Katia, you talked about one way to kind of maybe decrease some of these social fears of AI is algorithmic literacy. So just encouraging students and people to understand, what are these algorithms doing and how can you leverage them to help you? But I'm wondering how we actually achieve that. How do we communicate, especially in a very political environment, that, a very politically neutral way, that this is how it can help you. Here's why you should invest some time into learning about why this is important, without you having to go and do a PhD in cybersecurity. So in other words, that was a long-winded question, but what are the practical ways that we can actually get people, looking and learning and being involved in cybersecurity and using AI tools without kind of that fear and stigma that, sometimes comes up when things don't go right.
Khadija, do you want to start us off?
Yes, actually, I think my colleague might have something to say on this, Kara.
I'll start by just saying we at Media Smarts, we've designed an algorithmic literacy program. It's designed for high school age students, but I can say we have tested it and played this educational game with adults of all ages, and it works really well. And to your point, Anthony, we've designed it's a game-based learning, and we've designed it to be tactile, so it's card-based, because teaching about algorithms can be very hard and cognitively abstract. So you can find it. It's really available at mediasmarts.ca. It's called #4U. It's based on recommendation algorithms as a kind of entry point into algorithmic literacy. But it really sort of gives people a groundwork for what algorithms are, how they work, how they influence the kind of engagement they will have with content, just as a way to start to get people to think critically about the role of algorithms. And I think it could be a really good sort of introduction again to building a baseline, so that with that critical understanding of what algorithms are, we could start asking people, for example, in research or in other means and mechanisms, to think critically about what the security implications or safety implications may be. Example, in the research we did, once we had young people playing this game, by the third round of gameplay, they were already able to start critically reflecting on some of the algorithmic bias implications that we've been kind of talking about in this first round. They were already to see how data proxies were being used by data brokers and other and the algorithms themselves. So I just wanted to mention that.
Interesting. And I might pass it over to Scott.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And from my experience working with a number of different organizations, some of them actually here on the call, I found it actually very difficult to find people who say they have a mandate to do outreach. And it's unfortunate, because I think, there's so much good research, and those activities that we just talked about, the Media Smarts things are, I think, amazing. But on an enterprise level, some of the largest organizations that have responsibility to the public, I don't think I've been able to find, even by searching, the people who actually have the mandate and the budget to start doing outreach to either their clients as a corporate entity, or as the government reaching out to citizens. So I think we really need to put more emphasis on that.
We're just about ready for the last question, but I think I might just pass it to Julia from Get Cybersafe for a couple of words.
Well, for Get Cybersafe, we rely on our partners and the goodness of outreach to those people that are in the same space as us to spread our word, because we are a campaign that does have federal support, of course, but we don't advertise our services and the resources that we use, because we are an awareness campaign. So a lot of the stuff that we have on our website is available for free for anyone to use within the appropriate copyright rules that are, of course, found on our website. And we really try and make sure that all of our resources are available to everyone. So I hear what you're saying, Scott. Outreach is such an important part of how we get our message across to all Canadians at every level, in the way that they can receive the information easily.
I just want to thank everybody for the wonderful answers. That's the first question that we've had, and unfortunately we're going to have to move on to the next question, because time is the universal tormentor. So for the next question, what do we know about the effectiveness of mandatory cyber training and their frequency? So this is the question about how often should we be training people? What do we know about this question? What do we know about the interaction between the frequency of training and its effectiveness? So with that, I think we might start with our academic group this time, and I'll pass it over to Sana to hear her insights and opinions on the question of training frequency.
Thank you, Michael. So I think one of the challenges is how do we measure effectiveness? So for a lot of these training materials, when we're measuring effectiveness, it's typically after the end user has engaged with the material. But I really wonder, how do we measure long-term effectiveness? Like once someone has taken this training, is it actually translating into real-world behavior change? So I think that's something that is kind of lacking within the cybersecurity training space, is how do we measure that these training materials that we're actually developing are working?
Interesting. I'll pass it over to Claudia from the solutions team.
I think Sana's got the right idea. Behavior change is the key metric that everyone should be looking at. Whether training is effective will mean that you need to take a sample of awareness before and after that training and measure the delta in the simplest form. Obviously, you can measure additional things like engagement, the relevance of content, and everything else. With respect to the specifics of the question, my personal approach is to go after more frequent training, but focus on micro learning. So I like the idea of approaching people with nuggets of information rather than multiple diverse topics at the same time and taking up half a day of their lives doing it. So I prefer to do, for example, with the organizations that I work with, monthly training that is in a variety of formats. It can be obviously, it can be memos, it could be e-learning, but it should be reward driven. There should be some sort of a scoring matrix. This is the reason we like this idea of gamification that we're supporting here today. And finally, it needs to be example driven. Unless you present examples, people don't identify with it and don't extrapolate from there. But once you do, let their brain do the work, and it does, and it works, and we notice that behavior modification occurs in the positive, in the right direction.
Pass it to Kara from the academia team.
Claudia has provided great answers. I would just add maybe two things. I think when it comes to training, a lot of the initiatives that we see are coming or stemming from a sort of fear-based perspective that often can make people feel a bit anxious, but also a bit responsible for, if we don't do these things, our organization, our company, our university, whatever it might be, is going to be hacked. You'll be responsible. Fingers will be pointed. So I think one of the things that we haven't quite solved alongside what's been pointed out around measuring behavior change and effectiveness is how we approach training from a preventative framework that doesn't make individuals feel like they are being burdened with, and again, keeping in mind individuals who are very likely not the most sort of adept cybersecurity experts. Avoiding making them feel like getting it wrong is going to have colossal implications. Now, part of the challenge is that it could. I think we all recognize that, yeah, there are issues and we have to recognize the reality of that. But I just think from the education side and what we've seen, starting from a place of fear or anxiety has a demotivational effect on people. And so I guess it's just how do we, communicate the seriousness and the need and necessity of the training without doing that in a way that terrifies people and then sort of shuts them down. And so the other little point I would make is that, of course, I preface this by saying we're an education-based organization, so we fully support education. However, I think we do need to acknowledge that sort of laying the burden of cybersecurity on the shoulders of individuals through solely training as a kind of the solution is not necessarily the best, or shouldn't, I think, in our opinion, be the only response. That, there are often other sort of structural issues happening when we see massive like attacks, or for example, Khadija and I were just chatting about this the other day, instances where like companies haven't, updated hardware or software in a very long time that is also contributing to the issue. So, training certainly, but also I think we need to make sure that we're also acknowledging some of the structural issues at play that will help alleviate, I think, hopefully, some of that, like the burden that individuals may feel.
And we'll stay with the academia team and pass it to Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Kara. I absolutely love that last point. I think that a lot of times, as an educator, I can hardly speak against training. Obviously, I'm very into education, but I do think that a lot of times security problems are not going to be solved necessarily through training. Training arrives at the wrong moment for people. I think it's really hard to make it salient. And I also really, really like Sana and Claudia's point about we can't know if it's effective unless we can measure it, which I think is really spot on. But another thing that I'd like to acknowledge here is just that the difficulty of measuring outcomes for risk-based or probabilistic kind of problems is really, really problematic. We cannot tell whether a behavior change or a lack of behavior change leads to people having good security outcomes. Some people just get lucky. Lots of people just get lucky, right? It's not a one-to-one relationship between you make a bad password and you get attacked or whatever. There's a lot of like other factors going into that. And I think that really complicates it. In terms of the actual question, I think I would try to emphasize more that it's maybe not so much about frequency of training as trying to make sure it's delivered at an effective moment. For that reason, I'm really enthusiastic about the media smarts stuff, especially in the high school curriculums, because I think that is kind of a moment where we have some attention. I mean, teenagers are teenagers, but still, I think getting it in there early, making it part of like literacy and understanding is a really great kind of time to be putting in some building blocks that are hopefully then built upon by good design, whether of software or systems or whatever.
Great, and we'll pass it across to Scott.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at it from what do we know about the effectiveness of mandatory cyber training and its frequency or whatever, whether it's mandatory or not, as Elizabeth said, like this is really, really important. We don't know an awful lot because mostly we make a lot of assumptions about what we're measuring, and there are a lot of variables because when we see an incident, how many organizations actually track back to the root cause being a person, right? And can you track that back? So I think it's actually, as Elizabeth said, very difficult to really measure if training is effective from end to end between what we've trained people and is there a reduction in actual incidents. Now, we do it with phishing simulations where we can actually measure people's risk decisions in a simulated way, which is just shy of a real incident. But there are also a lot of variables there I've spoken with David about many times. So I think, there's a holy grail there that we're always going to be searching for a better way to measure the effectiveness of training. But there are variables, everything from the technical safeguards that are interjected between our training and the incidents, the time-based variables involved, the idea that annual training is usually a big bang and people kind of forget it after a short period of time, even if it's really good. So micro-learning, as was mentioned here a couple of times, is really important to be able to keep people engaged on an ongoing basis. And from my point of view, gamification is really key to that because you can't keep engaging people with a quiz or something that pops up in front of them in the middle of a task. So we kind of have to use gamification to trigger people's psychological drivers that we know actually are effective, maybe not always totally reliable, but I think they're better than just sending out an email or something that asks people or gets people into a micro learning type of quiz. So I think there are a lot of ways we could possibly improve those things. In the end, I think we're probably going to need a close correlation between technology that actually measures behavior in real time when incidents are likely to be happening, and then tying that to triggering training or triggering some kind of guidance, almost just-in-time training. So those kinds of things, I'm really looking to work closely with people that have access to those kind of metrics, so that we can really tie the educational part to the outcomes as closely as possible.
And to round out the answers from the solutions group, it's David.
Thanks so much. I think a lot of good stuff has been shared by others, but I'll start back with what I know. So what I know is that absent an awareness program or a phishing simulation program, click rates in organizations typically tend in the 30 to 35% range. With an awareness program, we typically see those drop anywhere between 15% or less. In a case of work that we do at Beauceron, it's closer to 5%. So we can measure the impact of education in lowering that susceptibility. As Scott knows, there's a lot goes into click rate susceptibility, difficulty, frequency, etc. But we can measure that. That's one aspect of impact of education that I know of, that I've seen. Some other observations from the data set, and keep in mind that Beauceron's data set is roughly 700,000 active engagements right now at any given time, from humans mostly in Canada and the United States. We know that if you do annual one and go training, you typically have a click rate that gets lower around your annual refresher time, and particularly if you do it sequentially for everyone at the same time, and then gradually ticks back up as the effect of that education wears off. So there is a timeliness impact that we have seen, and that just goes and makes sense when you think about all the other things that happen with people in the run of their day. For some of our organizations that have quarterly interventions, they have a flatter click rate curve over the course of the same 12-month period. So we know that more interventions does help flatten that curve out when we normalize for certain other factors as well. So that's great. Some other things that we've learned: you can overtrain people with too much information in one sitting. When you do that, not only do you have diminishing returns in terms of your impact on things like click rates or positive actions like report rates, you actually can have negative returns. You can actually demotivate people to the point where they don't care and they're going to click on everything. A lot of the things I've mentioned so far have come back to phishing data as one element where we can trace an active behavior and choice back to an individual, whether clicking or reporting. But I also think there's an important other measure that the social sciences have demonstrated continuously as being valuable, which is attitude. So one of the things that we do is we measure qualitatively people's attitude towards cybersecurity, their organization's approach to cybersecurity, how much they think their leader or manager cares about it. And we've seen significant double-digit improvements in attitude. Now, there's much more work to be done to connect attitude to actions. Those relationships obviously do exist. How much of an attitude? At what strength of attitude? How do we measure that more effectively rather than just simply behaviors as indicated on a computer? And behaviors are important. Lastly, I'll put it this way. I think there are two measures of behavior we can gather from quantitative data. I think there's individually attributable data that we can do a much better job of understanding the outcomes of security awareness, and there are population level aggregate data. And examples of this: data loss prevention, being able to see the preventative, proactive education of individuals and whether they have certified, verified DLP incidents, is an example of measuring specific educational material, impact on individuals, impact on their choices afterwards, etc. Things like malware encounter rates, how much malware is encountered by the organization in aggregate and what the aggregate population impacts are another example of one of those passive metrics. So much work to do in this area, but I would say this: mandatory hour-long training is the worst, one of the worst things I can say you can do to an organization. And it lastly depends on the outcomes. One higher education university in Canada we've worked with, they are a decentralized IT environment. This is one of the largest universities in Canada. They do not have a mandatory program. They have a voluntary program. So their population uptick is low, but the population that does engage with it has a 75% report rate plus on monthly phishing simulations, which is among the highest I've ever seen. So what are we measuring against in terms of defining success? mandatory completion, compliance, or impact on positive behaviors?
Very interesting. So that rounds out all of the answers, but I might pass it across to Sandy for a quick follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. I had to switch my headset. So David, you said something there which is interesting. It's building upon what a lot of other people said, and that's around the effectiveness and the engagement numbers too. That engagement, I think, is quite important, and I think a part of it is repetition of the content, and that also, it's a double-edged sword. How do we keep and continue to reinforce messages, but at the same time keep engagement up? And part of that is, how do we keep similar, same old topics fresh, interesting, people wanting to engage? What can we do? Scott touched on microlearning, but what other things can we do to keep similar old topics fresh and interesting and people engaged?
I think someone else said, I can't remember who, and I apologize, but you were so bang on when you said real examples. So the most powerful example for why we need multi-factor authentication is United Health Charge Healthcare's breach, which has a bunch of things happening to it, but at the end of the day was only protected with a username and password. So there's real examples of the impact that things can happen on one side. So that does tap into, on the downside, that fear, the anxiety, those type of things, but tangibly showing people, okay, this is how this goes down. Where we can show positive examples, probably the most successful clients that we work with have been doing a great job of showing real phishes reported by their employees that they said something is wrong, and showed how they stopped, and then showed what this phish was trying to do, but how someone's actions stopped it. So that's an example of, wow, this actually did make a difference. In other contexts, and I think, we've had some conversations before in a broad sense, how do we develop more metrics where we celebrate when people start projects and they start with security by design conversations, and give examples of new initiatives inside companies, et cetera, where it was like security didn't get bolted on at the end. Here's how this project happened, and here's the impact. It saved time. It's made it more trustworthy for clients. It's reduced the cost or risk to the organization, et cetera. So those are just some examples of, I think examples lead the way. I am concerned that we're in a state as an industry where we constantly look for novelty or humor or entertainment to try and get around this challenge of how do we tell the same story differently. And my concern is, our people are entertained? Yes, but do they retain it? Do they care about it? Do they associate it with meaningful risk to the organization? I don't know.
I think you raise an excellent point, and I promise to not be entertaining at all for the rest of the session in order to aid learning. Just to round out this session, I might just pass it over to Julia. I see a little look in her eye like she's got something she wants to say just to really round out the question for this round. Julia?
Absolutely. I kind of have a two-part in response to what Daniel and Sandy was saying. Cybersecurity awareness is what Get Cyber Safe does all year round. It's our MO. And so trying to keep these old stale topics fresh and engaging is what we try and do. We do things like rewriting holiday carols to be about cybersecurity. We take, a sea shanty that was popular a few years ago, rewrote it to be about phishing messages, create those earworms and fun marketing tactics that really allow these topics to stick in people's heads, so that maybe when they get a spam message, they'll think twice. Some of the resources that we've developed are real examples of fake online stores or real examples of phishing messages. And these resources help Canadians visualize and learn how to spot the signs of cyber scams. One of the things that we do is have a flow chart that kind of guides Canadians to critically think about the messages that they receive before they action the request and click on a phishing link. We all know cybersecurity is a shared responsibility, and every Canadian has a role to play, even if they don't know it. But for us trying to get a sense of how Canadians are doing in this shared responsibility is really important to us. So what we do is biannual public opinion research on the attitudes and the behaviors of Canadians and Canadian small business relating on their cybersecurity habits. So maybe I'll just give a little bit of what we've learned so far from our preliminary reports from our most recent research that we did in March of this year. That research tells us that the large majority of online Canadians, the number I have is 86%, said that they do take precautions to protect their online accounts, devices, and networks and connections. And more than 3/4 of business owners, 78%, said that their company actually has taken steps to protect itself against cyber threats. So we have tons of data from that research that we're still going through. And this data digs deeper into cybersecurity behaviors that Canadians are doing or not, like using strong and unique passwords for each of their accounts to avoid credential stuffing, enabling multi-factor authentication, enabling automatic updates, and so many other things. For Get Cyber Safe, it's clear from this research that Canadians do take their cybersecurity seriously. But over all of the years of doing this research and this particular survey, we can see that there's still a lot of foundational cybersecurity guidance that we need to continue informing Canadians about and continue helping them learn the steps that they need to take to actually get cyber safe.
Very, very interesting stuff. So that brings round one to a close. Thank you all for your wonderful answers. I've deliberated with the panel here internally, which is me, myself, and I, and we've decided that after this round, the scores for the solution team is that they've been awarded a click rate of 25 miles per gallon. That is the score that they've been awarded with to round out the first round. And for the academia team, we've decided that they have an incident rate of around 2 million pings per period. We don't know what the period was or who did any of the pings, but that's the amount of attacks that we're going to put for their threat surface for this particular round. So thank you for both teams, and we'll keep a close eye on the scores as we go through. Moving on to round two. Answering in this round will be the academic team and the practice team. And the first question will be, how mature do you feel security awareness is as both a practice and as a topic of study? So how mature is this idea of security awareness? And we might get into what it's actually called as part of this particular question, but how mature is this as a practice and a topic of study? And I'll pass it to Cara first to get her first thoughts on what the answer to this question could be.
The word maturity is maybe a bit convoluted, but I think our response or our answer kind of mirrors the conversation we were just having around the approach, because I think the approach informs the maturity. So, again, the individualized versus the kind of collective approach we've been talking about. I think the one thing that I'll say, and I guess what I am trying to say is I don't think we have a concrete measure, but I think that's because when it comes to cybersecurity, it's a bit of a moving target. And I mean, we've already been talking about the way that developments in the field can impact what we even define to be a risk and a threat, and how how we as a field, whether it's academics or people in practice, or those like ourselves, or straddling kind of both worlds, those definitions and understandings can shift within those contexts, within different communities, when you're talking to them, how they understand the risk to a company versus to an individual. So I think it's hard to give a concrete answer as to how mature it is. I think or how well developed. I think there's a lot of more work to be done, and there always will be, because of the way that technology evolves, and so the threats, the risks, whatever we want to call it, are also evolving. So that was a really nebulous way of not answering that question with an answer that's a non-answer, but I think that is the best answer I can give, is the non-answer.
Wonderful. Sometimes that's all we can do. And I'll pass it over to Marie.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm going to take a different aspect to this, but in the past years, it has gotten much better, I believe, in the areas of academia and research when it comes to security awareness in practice and in topic. For example, there are various government departments and Canada's National Research and Education Network that are working incredibly hard to secure networks and potential breach. At the same time, in creating cybersecurity awareness in the field, so from K to 12 to post-secondary and research as well. In addition, there are recent national security guidelines for research partnerships, as well as guidelines and tools to implement research security, which includes risk assessment forms that have been developed by the U15 group of Canadian research universities, Universities Canada, in collaboration with the Government of Canada's University Working Group, to have researchers in the field better understand the security risks and how to best protect their data, their research data, as this could have a greater impact on Canada's economy and national security relating to sensitive research, let's say dual purpose research. We've seen more efforts and resources deployed in growing the security awareness in academia and research from all levels. And at CSC, this includes the increase in researchers' collaboration on security topics and advancing the cybersecurity research field. And from the cyber skills development team perspective, we offer a curriculum review service for institutions to bring their programs or courses in cybersecurity to see if the Cyber Center or subject matter experts at CSC can provide further information to make sure that to align programs with the labor market and actually what is happening in the field. And now there's a bigger interest in an actual validation program. So there is an appetite to make sure that programs are strong across Canada. And that's definitely something that we're trying to follow suit for US and UK partners as well.
Very interesting. I'll pass to Elizabeth.
I was also thinking what Kara mentioned, that this really echoes the discussion we were having for the previous question. In terms of an academic perspective, I would actually say there's quite a lot of attention paid to security awareness. There's a lot of good qualitative work happening, a lot of efforts to try and understand how people are perceiving and understanding and thinking about threats and risks of a variety of kinds. That said, I think maybe the missing kind of step here, and this is what relates it back to that previous discussion, is trying to translate that into understanding how we can improve that, how we can change that. You know, measurement is certainly a part of that. I think, like I mentioned, a lot of this work is qualitative, which is an approach I have a ton of time for, and I myself have done extensive work in, but I think it doesn't necessarily translate to like obvious, like, oh, less of this, more of that kind of approaches. And so I don't know how I would phrase it in terms of maturity. Is it a topic that I think is getting attention? Yes. And I think that can only be good. Do I necessarily think that attention fully solves the problem that we're trying to get at? Maybe not. We could probably move on to an unscripted question and try to unpack the word awareness and whether awareness even matters more than other things. I'm inclined to think that we should be trying to design environments where the right thing to do is the easiest thing to do and the most obvious thing to do, and that might go farther. Because like Kara was saying, I think in the previous question, Kara, you and I should talk. You know, I think there's a lot of fear-based training, and that, like, I understand why it comes up, but I don't necessarily think it's super helpful. I think we need to put people in situations where they say, oh yeah, this is the right thing to do, you know, to get out of this risk, I do whatever. And it's the easiest, most obvious thing to do.
It's very exciting. I'll pass it over to Laura.
Thank you. So I think I'm just going to build on what Marie has said. So other areas of academia and the post-secondary level, so faculties such as medicine, social studies, law, and engineering are not as mature in terms of general cybersecurity awareness and best practices for their students entering the profession. Although our National Cyber Threat Assessment from 23 to 24 indicates that critical infrastructure is increasingly at risk from cyber threat activity. Cyber criminals exploit critical infrastructure because downtime can be harmful to their industrial processes and the customers that they serve. Ransomware is a persistent threat to Canadian organizations. Cybercrime continues to be the cyber threat activity most likely to affect Canadians and Canadian organizations. Due to its impact on an organization's ability to function, ransomware is almost certainly the most destructive form of cybercrime facing Canadians. So there's a lack of awareness of the cyber tactics being deployed, such as social engineering, phishing, ransomware extortion, and the best practices all professionals across fields can learn and apply to remain cyber secure and to protect the sensitive data that they work with.
Wonderful. We'll pass it over to Sana from the academia team.
Yeah, I think there's like lots of interesting things that have been said about, how mature is security awareness. And just to add to that, I think one of the things is there's a lot of tools that are out there that have been created, but we know less about what makes an effective security and awareness intervention. So some of the things that were mentioned previously is giving end users realistic scenarios or situations, right? Things like that, creating something that's engaging and it's not boring. So these are things that we've kind of learned as people who work in this space, but there isn't a design framework that's available that designers or developers of these interventions can use to create more effective interventions. So I think there's a lot of tools out there, but we don't know what makes a tool effective.
Oh, it's an interesting thought. We might pass it over to Julia from Get Cybersafe.
I was hoping you would say that. So this is a really hard question, I think, to answer. How mature something is so relative, and everyone is in their own, if I can be as cringe as I can be, cybersecurity journey. So for us at Get Cyber Safe, like our target audience for the campaign is all Canadians. We're talking to kids and youth, the parents, older adults, and small businesses. So it's kind of like a huge range of everyone. And it's important for us that our advice and guidance and all of our resources are developed with kind of everyone in mind. And, I wish we could be all things to everyone in this space, but it's impossible to meet everyone where they are in their journey. So we try to ensure that if you're 8 or 99 years old, or a small business just trying to make their way without a dedicated IT staff, that they're able to understand and actually implement our best practices. And some of the ways that we try and do this, it might not lead to being more mature, because we do have to respond to the Canadian population as a whole and how mature they are. So doing simple things like using plain language, taking the technical cybersecurity jargon and make it easy easy to understand and interesting and something that people want to engage with. If you've seen our social media channels or you've looked at our website, like we use vibrant colors and humor, and draw comparisons between cybersecurity topics and everyday examples. We're making memes about cats, unicorns, hamburgers, trying to get anything to kind of make people not so scared about cybersecurity. It's a huge topic, and not everyone is a cybersecurity expert or understands all of these big words that may not mean anything to them. So by making our content accessible, we can try and represent all Canadians and try and make sure that there's enough for everyone at whatever stage they're in. One of the other things that we're kind of proud of, the level of maturity that Get Cyber Safe is kind of expanding, is not only do we produce our resources in both official languages, we also are working towards including more Indigenous languages. So of our top 3 downloaded infographics and posters, we've actually translated them into Cree, Ojibwe, Inuktitut, and Mi'kmaq. And so it's one little step, but we're trying to reach more Canadians, trying to go and meet people where they are and try and give them those simple steps so that they can eventually become more mature in their cybersecurity awareness and best practices.
Wonderful. And we're nearly foreshadowing some of the questions to come. I'm going to pass it to Khadija from the academia team for the last word for that group.
Hi. A lot of really interesting answers that I agree with. I get the point about accessibility that you just mentioned, Julia. So I'll sort of pass my thoughts on in two forms. I was a student a few years ago, but having a computer science background, something that did often come up from a sort of technical perspective, that was an issue of contention at several points, was how cybersecurity training or any sort of security training really, as a computer scientist, is not actually embedded in a core curriculum. So when coming specifically to people within our own domain specifically, I think, unfortunately, we still have a long way to go, where we're still sort of fighting for the idea that, you know, security is part of computer science, is part of information technology, and it shouldn't be taught separately, you know, ad hoc, specialized in certain streams, but should be incorporated at different levels, or should be incorporated as a baseline throughout all levels of technical education. So that's one point that I sort of wanted to make. Second point, sort of different field entirely. I just wanted to highlight how intersectionality is really important when it comes to security awareness, touching upon what Elizabeth, Kara, Julia, and Sana said earlier. You know, cybersecurity or security awareness in general is often taught and preached as a monolith, but is not necessarily so. Throughout history and in a lot of research, digital media literacy, which incorporates security, you know, does affect or intersect with factors of race, sex, gender, sexuality, income. And, you know, some of these involve communities who are, you know, equity seeking and underserved. And so oftentimes when we come with security awareness, advice, interventions, you know, we kind of a lot of the research tries to do a one size fits all sort of approach, but that's not necessarily what works. Taking the simple example of some tech advice, you know, one common piece of advice that we see floating around to prevent shoulder surfing is to, you know, just hide your password, you know, when you're entering it on your phone. But for like a woman or an individual who comes from a home of, let's say, intimate partner violence, you know, doing that, just a little, you know, hiding your phone while you're entering your password in might have severe negative consequences and trigger an abuser. Same for like interventions in like misinformation, for example. You know, older individuals, those above the age of 60 or 65, as defined in the literature, it's often recommended that we do specialized interventions or specialized training for them. So I just wanted to highlight the factor that, you know, our awareness needs to be intersectional, and we should be able to, or should at least start or take some steps forward to separating it out as, you know, and stopping it from continue to remain a monolith. Sorry, bit of a running in circles, but I think I'm getting my point across. So that's all I wanted to say on the topic.
Wonderful. And we'll pass it to Sandy for the last word from the practice team.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I'll look at it a little different, I think, from the others, and I'll think about it more from the practice and how we do it within, let's say, a corporate security environment. You know, when we build our corporate security frameworks and everything that we need to support the organization, we often look at models, get influenced by standards like ISF, NIST, and things like that. In the security awareness field, there's actually a really nice maturity model out there. It's got from SANS. It's got a 5-step model where step 1's just non-existent. Step 2 is more around compliance. I got to do the bare minimum. Step 3, you've got a basic program in place where you're promoting awareness. 4 is where you're really starting to move the yardstick further. You got a lot more of a long-term sustained cultural change that's starting to happen, and it goes beyond just having a simplistic program in place with training and simulations, but you actually are starting to work on specific behaviors that you need to change that are specific to your organization or challenges that you're seeing. And then the last one I think is going to be the hardest one for a lot of us to get to, but it is the holy grail, and that's where everything is really a metrics framework and metrics driven. And I would actually characterize that as being very risk management driven, risk driven. You have really detailed insight into what the risk is, all of your incidents, you have it well documented, you know what's happening, you know all the vulnerabilities, you can quantify everything, and from that you can really prioritize all the risks, and then you develop a program that can actually affect the metrics that you've identified in your risk management. So, you know, ISF did a survey a while ago, and I think it's very consistent with everything that I'm seeing, is that a lot of organizations are right in that middle section around level 3, and they got good basic programs in place, can do awareness, and are looking at changing some fundamental behaviors. But I think the good news is we're seeing that evolution up towards level 4, more targeted behaviors, more specific things that they're looking towards. So I think from what I've been seeing, it's the good news. We're really evolving. We are maturing. We're going from the 3 up into the 4. I think the perhaps less good news is the level 5, where we really, really need to get to at some point in time, is probably going to be a little bit further out. We may hit a bit of a plateau, because in order to really hit that overall corporate security risk management type framework really needs to be in place. And I know that that's something that we're looking to evolve towards, because we really want to get focused, very, very focused on where are the biggest things that we can make an impact and a difference on.
Interesting. So I'll pass it over to the solutions group, and David, who has a follow-up question for our academia and practice teams.
Thanks, Michael. And here's an easy one for everyone. Have we done enough in the awareness programs that we all are part of or run to end the stigma of the human as the weakest link?
Well, that seems like a simple yes/no question. I'll pass that one over to Anthony.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think yes and no. I'm going to give a non-answer here. I think we've built a lot of tools, and certainly from the government perspective, we provide a lot of resources and guidance about how people can imbue a security culture, which implies that we all play a role. We are both the strongest link in that chain and also the weakest link. And I think it's important to kind of understand cybersecurity. Julia used the word journey, and I view it as a journey with no endpoint, right? Technology is always changing. The only way to be 100% safe is to unplug and go live in a cabin in the middle of the woods and completely live off grid. The only guaranteed way for you to be 100% effective at cybersecurity. So the human element is critical. And I think, like we've talked about before, a lot of it, the training that is provided either at corporate levels or in schools is fear-based. And I think that sends the wrong message. I think it says, we need to do this so that you don't make a mistake, you don't cause, financial damage, this, and that, which is important. But I also think we're starting to talk with people about more of a security culture and imbuing kind of a sense that it takes a community. It takes, not just the IT department anymore, but it takes everybody to be kind of mindful and aware. And I think that empowers, hopefully, people to say that, they can take actions to be, cyber hygienic in the environment that they're in. So kind of a non-answer, yes and no.
Wonderful. With that, we're going to have to move on to the next question. And I'd just like to let Anthony know that I've listed your quiet cabin in the woods on Airbnb. So even though you're there with no internet, you're still going to have to suffer from cybersecurity scams as I take everybody's deposit money. We might move on to the next question, which is, how can we better address digital literacy equity to ensure that everybody can access safely, critically, and confidently. And I think we've somewhat segued into this, and we've already heard some very interesting things that can probably lend to answers on this topic. So we're going to go through this in a little bit more of an express manner and maybe not get to everyone, but we'll start off with Sana from the academic team.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question, and some of the things have been mentioned previously, like you said, Michael. But I think one of the things that we need to do more is include users from marginalized communities into security and privacy. So this means when we're trying to understand what risks users face, we need to use more inclusive design practices to include these users into the discussions. But I think we also need to take a step back and look at, the methods that we use to include these users into our design practices or to kind of understand what they need, if those methods work for marginalized communities. So for example, when it comes to understanding the risks marginalized communities face, sometimes we use techniques like go and interview them. But there is some evidence in the literature that says maybe that is not an equitable approach. So we need to use more participatory design approaches or participatory threat modeling to work with these communities. And also working with these communities requires a lot of trust. So you can't simply go in and ask them questions. What are some of the things that concern you, or what are some of the risks that you face? So I think we need to do a lot of work ahead of time to build trust with these communities so that we can do more inclusive work with them, and then design more safety awareness solutions for them.
Interesting. I'll pass it over to Julie for the practice team.
Yeah, so I think it's just trying to do what Get Cyber Safe tries to do every day. Listen to the people that are consuming our resources and having public opinion research that we do to try and get feedback on how things are being perceived by Canadians in general. I mentioned earlier that cybersecurity is so relative to each person and what their needs are and where they are in whatever journey they're on and how they use their technology. And it's been mentioned many times in this call that it's evolving. Like, we don't know what AI is going to bring tomorrow, let alone next year. So there's such a big sense of fluctuation and change, and what we really just have to do is listen to each other, try and get a language that's common, and have similar cybersecurity best practices or standards across industry, academia, and of course the public sector, trying to make sure that everyone kind of knows what the stakes are and how we all fit together in order to make a stronger, more resilient, cyber safe Canada.
And I'll pass it back to Cara from the academia team.
I have a lot to add, except I want to sort of emphasize that digital equity and inclusion can start from a place of access and making sure everybody has sort of equal access to technology, and also bandwidth and all that, but also what everybody has already been talking about. Because I think often when we talk about digital equity and inclusion, or the digital divide in this country, it can be sort of synonymous with access, bandwidth, and those kinds of elements of the divide, which are certainly part of it, but less so around this conversation we're having about the other kind of intersectionalities that we need to consider, and that are, I think, as has been mentioned and as we've been talking about today, can be really pivotal to success in bringing people or increasing people's cybersecurity practices, cyber awareness. I have other thoughts around the specifics for the how, but I'll save it because I think maybe we'll come to that in the next round of discussion.
Wonderful. And to round out the answers to this question, I'll pass it to Marie.
Thank you. As for post-secondary education, I think a lot has been said already, but especially to encourage underrepresented communities in cyber, computer science, engineering, and programming, there is a need to cultivate a culture of belonging and inclusion. by removing heavy entry requirements and make introductory level courses accessible to people with little to no prior experience, challenging stereotypes of who works in cybersecurity by highlighting work done by cybersecurity professionals who identify as women, 2S LGBTQIA+, Indigenous, Black, racialized, and persons with disabilities, and also incorporating, as it has been mentioned earlier, real world application into introductory courses to spark students' interests by showcasing the value of cybersecurity work in all areas, because cybersecurity is in every field. This also includes neurodiverse individuals, as within each neurodivergent category, there are different strengths and abilities that can reinforce cybersecurity. Embracing neurodiversity is celebrating the diverse strengths, skills, and perspective of neurodivergent individuals in a welcoming workplace. Embracing neurodiversity is cybersecurity in cybersecurity benefits both neurodivergent individuals as well as the cyber discipline as well.
So with that, we can bring round 2 to a close, which means it's time to award points. We have run a survey within the office here in order to assess all of the answers that have been given. And the scores that we've come up with are highly significant statistically, but a sample size of just 1. So take that as you will. But for the academic team, they have been given a risk assessment coverage score of $3 per heads for group over 12. I'm not sure how many restaurants do risk assessment in the same way that they do corkage, but we have a coverage score of $3 per head. And for the practice group, we have been awarded a time to detect measurement of mean, which is to say that we have a mean time to detect of mean. So congratulations to both teams for the scores that they've received. We will be, of course, tallying those and working out at the end who has points and who also has points. So with that, we will move on to the next round, which is round 3. Answering questions in this round will be the practice team and the solutions team. So it should be very interesting and very exciting. And for the first question, we're going to be looking to the solutions team and asking them, which is the most important, but also most misunderstood cybersecurity topic? Which is the most important, but also most misunderstood cybersecurity topic? And we will be asking first, Scott.
Thank you, Michael. I would say the most important but misunderstood cybersecurity topic is actually how well employees or individuals receive, consume, understand, and can be ready based on training that we've provided them. So that means, how do we engage them? How do we measure whether or not they actually understand things before we apply tests to them? I think phishing simulations, we've talked, as I said, I've talked to David about this many times, have really good value, but a lot of times, if we do that before we have really built an assurance that people understand what we've actually put them through as training, then we're really just demonstrating that they are vulnerable, and we're proving to people, yes, I'm vulnerable. But it doesn't really convey to them the relevant and actionable guidance that each individual needs to be able to spot, a bad sender, for example, or a bad URL, or even bad body content. In fact, it doesn't even begin to address social engineering, which isn't done through phishing. So right now, our most used assessment tool for determining whether people have learned anything is the live phishing simulations, and it does measure their risk decisions to some extent. But my view is we haven't done enough, and people generally don't understand the process of learning from the training point onward. If anybody's familiar with the concept, and Michael and I have talked about this, Bloom's taxonomy, which is really just a way of determining what the learning outcomes or the learning objectives are in a training program. You know, do you want people to just understand this, or do you want them to be able to apply it or act on it or be creative and do analysis? If you don't have a higher level target for what the training is actually going to do, then you're really just forcing people to go through that training. They've got the check mark that says they're done it, and now we're going to test them on it. And to me, that's the most misunderstood part of the cybersecurity area.
Interesting. We'll hand it over to Sandy.
I think of somewhat similar, but probably a little bit higher level on this might be, you know, the misunderstood element might be, or misperception is the role that actually humans play in security. And what I mean by that is, you know, we've done surveys within our own teams and our own organization, and we're trying to gauge an understanding of where they're at. And I think one thing that stands out to me is people still look at this as a technical issue. Security, that's IT's problem. IT takes care of it. Got an antivirus firewall, that's good enough. Well, actually, no, there's a lot more you can do. But there's another part of it is sometimes people don't think they can do enough. They can't make a difference in security. And part of what goes into that is it's a bit of a scary topic. It's big, it's complex, it's fast moving. There's so many threats that are out there. So I look at it and I say, people don't understand the why. And I know we're going to be really focused on that. Why is this important? Why do humans matter? Why would anyone go after me? Why am I a target for this? And, you know, you go back to something as simple as phishing. It's been around a long time, still sticks around. Why? Because it's targeting people, because it works. And it's that human element that's still not well understood. And I characterize it and I say there's kind of three elements to that, in that people are visible. You know, you get an organization with 50,000 people in it. Well, that's 50,000 attack targets. They're variable. There's such a diverse amount of knowledge and understanding about cybersecurity and what it is and what they can do about it. And I think the last, and we've kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, is they're vulnerable in that we're humans. We have emotions. We're subject to social engineering. We have tendencies. We sometimes rush, don't think things through. We click on the wrong thing. So I look at that and say, you know, if we can help to change the perspective that you actually can do it. And then I think there was a question just before this that talked about it, in that, you know, we have to make people understand the whys. We talked earlier, use examples related to what they're doing on a daily basis. You know, don't talk about just the employee side of it, but what does it mean to them at home? Give them real examples, equip them not necessarily with tools, but perspectives and guides and skills with some of the training, but also the examples we talked about. And I think it comes down to not only explaining the why, but helping build their confidence that people can actually make a difference. You can do simple things that make a difference. That's where I think we're really facing, I think, the biggest challenge. And in my mind anyways, it's probably the most important thing that we need to focus on.
Wonderful. I'll pass it over to Claudia from the solutions team.
And I agree. I think there isn't much that's new out there, and to borrow from Socrates, we need to get people to understand and know themselves, right? So the old adage of know yourself applies when we talk about the lack of effectiveness of certain strategies that we've seen applied to the social engineering problem. If social engineering is the biggest issue, the least understood issue out there, then we need to ask ourselves why. And a misunderstanding of the sophistication is really where it's at. So these social engineering tactics are not just so sophisticated that they are indistinguishable from the real thing, but they are so sophisticated that they take advantage of cognitive biases that, for example, allow the attackers to use very, very simple approaches. Think of the 419 scams or the Nigerian letter scams. they give people such a false sense of security because you talk to so many people and they say, oh yeah, I can see these scams coming a mile away, so they receive maybe 20 of those, and then the next one is indistinguishable from the real thing and they fall for it. So the sophistication, when we talk about social engineering sophistication, is not just the technical sophistication, the fact that in 85% of the cases they're starting to use generative AI, etc. We're talking about simple things like the psychology of the action that will get you into an organization, even bypassing multi-factor, for example. And we've seen that with the Lapsus group, a bunch of teenagers that went and broke the defenses of companies like Microsoft and Nvidia and a whole bunch of others that have been humiliated using simple techniques like putting out a simple post on social media and saying, hey, if you guys want to cause some trouble, we would love to have a login account. And I love the last line that they added to their posts. The last line said, you will be paid if you want to. And you can assume that many people just said, here, we'll just let you in. And that's what happened. So the idea of what's bad, what's weak about certain aspects, what's least understood about certain aspects of cybersecurity has a lot to do also with the delta that our brains are used to seeing. So our brains, just like Charles Babbage said 200 years ago, and the lovely Lady Lovelace, they said here we've built a difference engine, which was the first computer, but it's modeled on the brain. The brain sees contrast and it sees the difference between simple things and more complicated things. So yeah, there's an overall false sense of security from simple to complex. We've forgotten to understand what it means to add to our social engineering tactics the simple act of desensitizing the recipient. We're still seeing people in all sorts of professions fall for Nigeria or 419 letter scams. And if I can add, at the management levels as opposed to the user levels, we're still seeing misunderstanding of the definitions between the words threat, risk, and harm. And understanding some of these things will go a long way towards solving this problem, which, if we can take anything away from today, it will be the fact that the problem has not been solved. And in fact, we're far from solving it.
Wonderful. And don't forget, you'll also be able to take all of the points that you get away from today as well.
Oh, those are, I want to cash them in.
Oh, you can't cash them in. You can only exchange them for other points.
They're in kilometers per hour, right? The units. Yeah.
We'll pass it over to Laura.
Thank you. And I think I'm going to echo a lot of what's already been said, but in my opinion, it's cyber awareness and proactive cyber defense. Technology is transforming rapidly, and cyber actors are finding new and increasingly sophisticated ways to execute a successful attack against victims. They're exploiting the human vector, as we've mentioned, and it is a very vulnerable avenue to use. Therefore, it's an important topic, as the more awareness on this issue, then the more protected that Canadians are. There is perhaps a false sense of security when people recognize by sight something like an obvious phishing email, or if they see their spam filter auto-detect and move a phishing email into their junk bin. Seeing this in action, while it's great, can also undermine the broader ecosystem of threats and make the average person feel like their computer antivirus is enough. So the volume of this low-level and unsophisticated activity also means that individuals are getting the spam fatigue and feel like avoiding these are inevitable. So they might as well go on with their life while relying on their technology providers to support them. This psychology could be a detriment to wanting to learn more, leading to more frequent and successful attacks. Thanks.
Wonderful. We'll pass it back to David with the solutions team.
Yeah, I think that going back to Scott's point about phishing and what success actually looks like, and one of the most sort of misunderstood things is, click rates and what they actually can and can't tell your organization. And the reality is, clicks can happen by accident. Clicks can happen by serendipity. Clicks can happen because they were on their phone versus on their computer. So the current story of click rates, which is a big focus for a lot of reporting programs, is as a metric flawed. and highly manipulable. The quality of the templates dramatically changes as the frequency of phishing. The most important metric in my mind in a robust, balanced cybersecurity awareness program is report rates. Report rates demonstrate something that requires intention. You don't accidentally report a phishing email. You have to actually go and intentionally find the report mechanism, do it. If you can capture report intent, which is something that we've done with quite a few clients, you can actually measure a new metric, reporter accuracy. So I can say, for example, in my company, 84% of the time last month when someone reported a simulation or a real email and they said it was a phish, it actually was a phish or phish simulation. So that's a great job of being able to measure back knowledge, intent, and action as opposed to just coincidence with click rates. That's not to say that click rates can't tell us something and that lowering them isn't important. It's just that they can't be the only metric of a phishing simulation program.
Wonderful. So with that, we've heard answers from both teams, so I might pass it over to Elizabeth for a follow-up question.
Thanks, everybody. This is a really interesting discussion, and I feel a little sorry academia was left out of this round. I thought that this was one of the better questions. As I listened to all of you, the question that kind of occurred to me is, we're talking here about what's misunderstood, where there's still opportunities to do a great job in computer security, where there are gaps. But maybe my kind of provocative question is, where have we done a good job in training people about computer security or helping people understand or designing for people to do the right thing? And is there anywhere that we think we've done a great job, that we've solved the problem? And is there anything we could learn from that? I'm not sure I have a great answer to this question, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Interesting question. We'll pass that one to Julia.
That's a really interesting question. I don't know if I'm fully prepared to answer it, Elizabeth. I think there's so much that we've done well here. You know, Canadians, we may be kind, friendly, and say sorry too much, but you know, I think those are good traits. But when it comes to cybersecurity, maybe we're too trusting. But I think we're all here. In this call, at least to help each other, and all these sectors coming together to try and level up and talk about these challenges is, I think, a good thing. And the fact that we have such great leadership in the Cyber Center in trying to connect all these different sectors together at the highest of levels is a really great sign. I think Canada is in a great space to be a very secure online country, with all of the digital services from the federal government that are moving online. There's a lot of steps that we have to take to get there, but I know, based on all the work that my colleagues are doing on the technical side of things with the Cyber Center and all of these other government departments, critical infrastructure, I know that cybersecurity and security for Canadians' information is top of mind and is of the utmost importance. So I know that didn't really answer your awareness stuff, but I think that we're in a great space. And with programs like Get Cyber Safe, if I can be so self-indulgent, we're trying to make things easy on Canadians so that we can level up together and make sure that these little steps that we take are not for nothing, and that they actually are meaningful and will make us all stronger as we do them together.
Thanks, Julia. I did just want to jump in and say that I was not trying to dump on anybody in this room or indeed anybody else outside this room. I really wanted to emphasize what a hard problem this is, and in a lot of ways, how kind of fundamentally unsolvable it is. So just to clarify that aspect of my problem, it was very much not aimed at anybody at all.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
The only person getting dumped on here is the recycling bin in the corner of David Shipley's office, which has its own Instagram account, I think. So we'll pass it back to David. David, you had something to say?
I am totally creating that Instagram account now. But in all seriousness, I do have a success story for us, and it's this. Consistently, when we have looked at the results from tens of thousands of employee surveys submitted to us, over 90% of responses agree or strongly agree that they do play an important role in protecting themselves and their organization. So the evidence I have, and I think that there's the evidence that's been shared by the Get Safe Cyber Safe team, we have done a good job of raising awareness. There are very few people left who don't know that cybersecurity is a thing. Now our next challenge is translating awareness to careness. How do I consistently demonstrate that my awareness translates into better decision-making and action? And I'm excited by that opportunity. I think it's the combination of all the things that we've talked about today: better UX, better UI, better choice architecture, better information, better design of systems, better education, evaluating the efficacy of specific educational products and materials and sentences and the impact it can make in choices. I think we're at the end of the first chapter of an incredible book when it comes to helping empower people to make better decisions with technology. And I'm excited to hear and learn so many things today. So that's my success story to share. I think we've done a good job. Awareness, now it's careness.
Interesting.
Michael, if I may jump in, I just picked up a stat while David was talking that I think is something that's really great and lends well to what Elizabeth was asking. So according to our research, 75% of Canadians report feeling prepared to face cyber threats. And that's because they felt like they had the right resources and they knew where to get the information. 60% of Canadians said that, and that there are steps that you can take to protect yourself online. However, we did note that there is a big perception from Canadians that you can never protect yourself online. There's, again, 39%, sorry, said that it's impossible. So we know there's still a lot of work done, but if we have 3/4 of Canadians reporting that they feel prepared to face the cyber threats, I think that's a good sign. So I'm a little bit more optimistic that we're heading in the right direction.
Another good success story. I'll pass it over to Anthony.
Just remember to unmute myself here. Yeah, I really like this question, and I'm going to do something that I don't like to do, and I'm going to tease out the technical computer cybersecurity from the human-centered cybersecurity. I think we have done a really good job in the academic and the IT professional space of upskilling, educating a capable and confident workforce of experts who are able to stay at the leading edge, respond, be nimble when it comes to cybersecurity. I work with a lot of really fantastic and phenomenal colleagues who are, much smarter than I am at CSE and the Cyber Center, who are really doing exciting things at the leading edge of the field. And my team, we, the Cyber Center has created the Canadian Cyber Security Skills Framework, which provides some guidance for corporations, enterprises, small, medium businesses on the formalized rules and the skills and stuff that they need to know. Where I think, and I think we've identified this in the conversation, and I don't know if there's an endpoint, but we need to continue improving, is on the non-IT specialists. And I really like, David, what you said about the care aspect, because my mom, I get, maybe a text message once a week or once a month with a screenshot of an email saying, is this spam or should I click this link? And my first response would be, it's the exact same email you got last month. If you look at it, come on, it's common sense. But by doing that and by not showing kind of that care, I have to recognize that she's at a different level, right? She's not an IT expert. She doesn't live in the cybersecurity field. And she's coming to me because she views me as an expert, for guidance. And if I were to send off that response and say, come on, just give it a think. Well, my mom's not going to be, texting me for advice. And I don't think we should expect clients and the general public to rely on us. So we have to talk about cybersecurity from a care perspective and make it relatable and empathetic to what people are already doing in their day-to-day lives. Cybersecurity is important, not just because it's protecting you from the digital environment, but the reality is we live in a digital economy. You're already online, and here are some things that can enhance your experience online, enhance your business, enhance your telemedicine or all these types of things. Julia talked a lot about, what the Cyber Center is doing. I know there's a lot of great companies, Microsoft, Amazon, putting out a lot of educational material. And I think we need to continue down that line of just keep engaging and keep talking with people and keep making this relatable to their everyday lives.
So for the last word on this question, I'm going to pass it over to Sandy.
I think, Michael, I'm just going to echo a little bit of what David said, because I can agree and probably add a little bit more. Within our organization, one of the things that stands out tremendously when we survey people is we have succeeded, I think, in telling people or getting people to understand that security is important. And I think that's a very first step, right? It's a good foundational step, so people aren't going to ignore it. Other simple things is I think we've succeeded in getting people to understand what is phishing. May not always be able to detect the right one, report it, etc., but certainly people have come a long way there. And we're getting a lot better at people recognizing that education is important, that I need to learn more. So I think from those fundamentals, we've done a lot. I think as well, there's an awful lot more to go, but you can't go those next steps until you have some of those foundations, which we've done a good job of.
So thank you. With that, that brings our round to the close, our final round, the third round. So we've run extensive testing internally here at the HC2P on all of the answers given. And after that round, that sees the practice group scoring general compliance with GPS, ESPN, MBCBC, VSPA compliance, which is really great for them to have an alphabet soup compliance rating. And we've also found that the solutions group has managed to score both a high false positive rate and a high false negative rate, leaving at the end with no errors. So that's great. Those two, the positive and the negative, cancel each other out. So that's wonderful. That brings our session to its close. I think that it has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm very interested in all of the comments, the perspectives, the work that all of these people have been doing. It's phenomenal to see the range of what people have been doing, but also it's nice to hear some of the success stories. It's very easy for everybody to continually bring up the unsolvable, the inconquerable, the white whales of cybersecurity and cybersecurity awareness. But it's good to see that we're actually making some progress in some areas. And I'm very glad to hear from our representative from CyberSafe that Canadians are challenging the idea of the cybersecurity paradox. They care and they're doing things about it. It's not the old, they seem to care, but they're not doing anything. They care and they're working towards increasing their own cybersecurity. We just need to find better ways amongst ourselves to enable them to do it. And what a great group of people that are working to increase the science and increase the practice of doing cybersecurity. So with that, I'd like to bring our session to the close. I will again thank all of our wonderful panelists. You've done an excellent job. And I'd like to also thank the organizers of the SECREV committee, and all of the people who've worked to make this happen. And I invite people to stay around for the next group. They are a Spanish-speaking group. So if you want to practice your Spanish, please stay around for them. Fascinating range of speakers from almost every country that speaks Spanish. And bienvenidos a todos los hispanoparlantes que son esperando la próxima sesión. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll see you again at the next one. Thank you.